first of all, let me welcome you again to the Future of Mobile Summit and welcome our panels, because we have, let me check, how are we doing? At least a good 45 minutes to discuss one of the most important, I think, topics in the industry right now, so you know where you have to be. Well done on your priorities. I have here Anurag, the CEO and President of Infinite Convergence, Julian Ranger, Chairman and Founder of DigiMe. We also have, if you are in MEF, you would recognize this man, Andrew Babb, the Chairman of MEF, but as well as here, the CEO and Founder of iProov, and Michael Becker from Assurant, a strategy advisor for Assurant. Now, each one of them has got a very interesting career. I won't give any time to pretty much say anything, but we will probably just mention a few things. The real questions we have in the next 40 minutes is to understand the future of privacy. And future of privacy is a big thing, because we probably need to start from the present as well. So let me sit down with that. And let me ask you instead, do you think that privacy in the mobile world is a concern area, something you should all be worried about, or perfectly fine? If you think it's a concern area, raise your hand, and I'll stand up again. Ooh, I'd like to see who. Well, okay, somehow I see that corner was slightly more positive, but definitely this is a topic which is at the core of probably a seismic change in the industry as well. I did some homework, only one bit, and I went on the internet, as you do, to do a search on the definition of privacy. That's what I got. The state in which one is not observed or disturbed by people. Oh my God. Do you feel disturbed or observed in the internet? I think your vote was pretty much already showing something here. And it's not just what we're discussing. Over the last 12 months, we've heard a lot in the press, in the news. I think the last 2 months we had Google fined 50 million euro in France from breaching privacy laws. I think we got Facebook in Germany being told that they cannot cross-reference their data. A lot of discovery is happening in the industry overall. And so probably it's worth to start and imagining with Michael. So that's happening, but what are the customers? The customers, I need to be the only positive one here because you're all negative about these privacy things. The customers are doing things. They're on the internet. They are, enjoying their social networks and they're not complaining. So what are we all here about? This is not a problem.
All right, so I want to come back to later, though, your definition of privacy.
Yeah, please.
Because I want to challenge it.
Because
I actually think it's a bit dated and needs to be updated, but let's come back to that in a bit. Where we're right now when it comes to privacy, security, compliance, people's understanding of the flows of their information on the internet, and mobile services in particular, is what we refer to based on an MEF study we did last year called and essentially what we found is what we refer to as the Grand Awakening. Last year we did a study of 10 markets around the world, and we asked people a series of attitudinal and behavioral questions at the intersection of personal information, privacy, and trust. And what we found is that people are starting to wake up. And in fact, in the last 2 years, 75% of people have taken their first action to actively and consciously protect themselves within the mobile space. And interestingly enough, in the first 6 months of last year, 2018, 26% of people took their first action to do so in that. So, and of the 12 actions we asked them about what are you doing to protect yourself, on average people are taking about 2.3 actions, and there's no consistent action against the 12 that we actually looked at. So it's really fascinating information when we look at the fact that people are just now waking up. They're just now getting aware of the fact that there is some form of action they need to take, but the actions they're in fact taking are somewhat naive and quixotic, if you will, because it's kind of a panacea. They feel they're doing right, but it's not really taking that great of effect for them to truly, in fact, protect themselves. In this whole process, though, when we started to dig deeper into that data, so what we learned is grand awakening. People are waking up. They're starting to protect themselves. They're starting to take or attempt to take some action. We then started to dig a little deeper, and we actually found 6 unique cohorts within the population of people out there. Those 6 cohorts are the unaware, and or AKA those aren't taking any action. I define the 24% of the audience takes no action to protect themselves across all the 10 markets we studied. And if you're not taking any action, you're just simply unaware of the risks and or opportunities. Then those that are taking action fall into another 5 different groups. So they're either feeling helpless, they're feeling apathetic, they're impaired, they're empowered, and then I threw in an extra one just as an aspirational, the enlightened, because I'd love to, but I don't think there are any digital Buddhas out there, so nobody's fully enlightened when it comes to effectively protecting themselves right now. So what we now need to start thinking about, and hopefully in the rest of the panel we can go through and understand, what do we do about this? After we tackle the definition of privacy, how do we actually help people go from a quixotic adventure of protecting themselves to actually truly doing so, and help them move up from the scale of helpless and apathetic into a sense of empowerment? And that's what I'd like to talk about.
And so you say that in your study, and by the way, the study is available for people to download from MEF. There are downloadable, free downloads for everybody. But the study was showing that there is a special time. So people are moving from a generic concept of awareness to actually doing something.
Yeah, there's a shift, but I don't think they're doing something because they think they need to, but they're not really doing the right things either, and that's what we can talk about in a little bit.
So we're still at the very beginning.
Yeah, we're very, very much in the beginning.
Now, if this is the consumer, so the consumer are probably noticing something, but Anurag, I'd like to ask you as well. You wear many hats, but one of the hats as Infinite Convergence I'd like to touch on is the enterprise side. And what do you think of the enterprise are experiencing, thinking, planning in terms of privacy?
No, that's a great question. And firstly, before I answer the question, I actually tend to agree with Michael. That definition that we talked about earlier is clearly dated because it does not apply in the situation we're currently facing. And I think it's important to note the situation that we currently are in, it crept up on us because there was a complete lack of awareness of the power that was in the hands of some of these companies and the power that was allowing them to pull data to the extent that we are now finding out through a lot of these breaches that are coming out in the open. So this clearly crept up on us. Now, the enterprise is no different than the consumer environment, right? Because in one side of your life, you're a consumer, and the other side, you are an enterprise employee of some sort, right? So the habits that you garner within your consumer life quickly creeps into the enterprise. And whereas in the consumer life, that privacy is something that is yours and yours alone, and you have to ultimately make that decision whether I'm comfortable with this extent of lack of privacy. The minute you walk into the enterprise, you are now working and dealing with enterprise information, which can be compromised at a much, much higher cost. And I think that is the difference between the two scenarios. But the risk is regardless the same, on both sides. Now, that being said, going back to your report, which we talked about, Michael, earlier on, I would actually challenge the report. It shows a very high level of awareness amongst the people who were surveyed. But if you look at the population today across the globe, I think, if you look, let's take India or Africa for that matter, the number of internet users and mobile users in those countries, I think India has about 1.1 billion, right? The US has about 350 million. I doubt if there's any kind of awareness in that base of users or an appreciation of protecting their privacy and managing their data. And today I think for Facebook and WhatsApp, India is the largest market, single largest market for that company. The reason they're investing, even for Google, for that matter. So even though I think the data that's presented in the report is promising, it does not, I believe, truly tell a story, where I believe awareness is a serious issue because of the fact that this issue has crept up on us. And it came up to us very suddenly. There's some level of awareness, some level of regulation, especially here in Europe with GDPR, but I think a lot more needs to be done before we actually see that level of understanding, both in the consumer's environment as well as in the enterprise.
I'm going to comment on that real quick, and then I'll another question. So you mentioned a couple times that it's crept up on us, and I'd actually really disagree on that. We've been talking about the rights to privacy since the late 1800s. All right, and we can actually look at the literature and monitor the progression of that process. And in fact, in the United States, we were talking about the need for every individual to have some like ombudsman to represent them in the market in 1973. But the technology didn't exist, so we parked that conversation.
No, that's what I meant when I said it crept up. It crept up because the technology got so powerful with their ability to gather that data. Nobody informed you, nobody took your permission to do that, is what I meant by saying
yeah,
crept
but this is
up.
why I argue, though. But even then, I don't think it crept up. We've all known, industry's known. There's a great documentary that you all should watch as part of your homework of this panel called Terms and Conditions. We've known. The challenge, though, is we haven't empowered the individual because, to your point, the technology hasn't existed. We've needed the DigiMe's of the world to make that happen. So maybe you can hold Julian on.
Here we go. I like the panel like that. That's exactly. Keep on going. And you prepare your questions as good as well. But we have different views, but perfectly, it seems to be saying anyway that there is a lot of data out there. And, well, to the DGME of his word, as was mentioned, who manages, who owns that data then? How do we start looking at these? So Julian, tell us more.
Well, it is about the new technologies that are going to empower the individual. But in fact, we probably, just to be more controversial, talk completely the wrong side of the telescope. We're looking at it from one side and not the other side. So the two prevailing discussions that are held is one is that privacy and security is broken, with an implication then that the individual should somehow take back control, with the implication that the individuals will allow less to happen. So we'll go from here to here. The second prevailing wisdom is that there's an inequitable value exchange. Too much on the business side, not enough for the individual. So the individual should take back control, but we're going to end up doing less. Well, that's just not something we want to do. We don't go from GDP up here to down here. We don't decrease. So it's too easy to counter that by saying that makes no sense. But what is actually happening is we're missing the third problem. And the third problem is that we actually need to share more, not less. So if we take personalized medicine, if I want somebody, a business or an app, to give me health advice, I'm going to have to share all my health data since I was born, probably my wearables with my heart rate and temperature and everything else, my genomics, probably the food that I eat, and maybe even my social data so the app can tell my mental state at any time for different recommendations. That's an enormous amount more data I need to share if I want to take advantage of the future, right? Especially in developing nations, etc. The same if I want full financial inclusion, and so on and so forth. We need to share more. And the problem is that the current architecture, we actually can't. So although we have these omnipotent businesses, or they seem to be, they're not. They get a small amount of our data and interpret a fair amount. But there's no Google, Facebook, there's no company on the planet that can find out everything I do, where my doctor, hospital visits, all my bank account, everything I watch, see, listen, eat, so on and so forth. So therefore, there's a problem, and the problem is that the architecture can't do what we want to do in the future. And the only person in the whole planet that knows everything about me is me. So there actually has to be a shift from businesses having the data to the individual, because the individual can go and get all their data. I can go and get all my health data, my Facebook data, my finance data. I can create the ultimate library. And if I have a tool to do that, of course, DigiMe is one of those tools, but if I just have a tool to do that, and then companies are not going to bother tracking me, because if they come to me, they get rich data. They get single source, wide across categories, deep in time, accurate, probably fully normalized data with privacy, security, and consent. So we can solve the privacy and security problem by solving the bigger problem. And the bigger problem is, how do we share more? And as soon as I have it, then privacy and security is inherent. I'm only going to allow it to go to those I want to give it to. So that's the key. Think about the right piece of the telescope. If you give it back to the individual, a lot of the problems disappear, and you can now do the future.
Giving back to individuals, but then they would ask for the individuals to be identifiable in the world. So Andrew, the question went to you as well. How do you make sure that the personal data is actually owned by somebody which is the right person in the world? How does it work in the internet?
So this is a very fundamental. Thank you. So this is a very fundamental question. There has, over the last 10 years, been, in my view, a completely mistaken and actually toxic relationship between privacy and anonymity. The feeling was that if you wanted to have privacy, then you had to have anonymity. Privacy is a good thing. I would sustain that in the online world that we have today and moving forward tomorrow, anonymity is actually bad to the point of being toxic, because anonymity is about a lack of accountability for you and your actions. Today we can see the consequences of uncontrolled anonymity. And in fact, it's very bad for the user as well, because the establishment of trust is all about attributes that people know about you. The things that enable us to transact in the society today are based upon things that the government knows about us. In future, the ability to do things in the online world will depend upon things that Julian and others have made it possible for the information recipients to know about us. So these attributes, the ability to assert attributes, private attributes about us, becomes actually an enormous element of empowerment. But it's also a threat, because if the wrong person gets to assert my attributes, if I start to impersonate myself as Julian, then you have a devastating problem. And if actually things get into Julian's personal data store, which actually are associated with me, now we've got incredible pollution, which again can be potentially toxic. So ultimately, there's a really fundamental step in this chain, which is not about anonymity, but it's about the control of the right to assert your identity. And ultimately, there's only one basis upon which you can assert your identity, which is who you are. It's not something you remember, because you can forget that or it can be stolen. It's not something you forget, something you possess, because otherwise, like my son, you can drop it into the toilet and your entire life vanishes. It's got to be something that you are. So the future, I'm an absolute firm believer that the future of determining the right to assert these attributes, which include many pieces of private data, and you choose which bits of private data you want to assert, but your right to assert them, those are mine, and I'm going to tell them to you, will ultimately come down to something that you are, which is biometrics, and at the heart of that is all about, is this a genuinely present human being, which happens to be my particular passion.
So, great. So I think in the last 10 minutes, we covered some of the hottest topic within the privacy, the user awareness, or you should say lack thereof, but also the complexity of the fact that the user, is a personal user, is a business user. There is many aspects to be dealt. The concept itself, whether personal data should be managed by or owned by a person, or should be re-engineered completely different, as actually we heard, by thinking in different ways, and identity as the base of it all. So here we could finish the topic, but no, I think there is a couple more. I mean, apart from having just touched the surface of this discussion, we were challenged by the very base of what we're discussing. What is privacy? So first I'm going to ask you as well, before I was challenged by my internet research of 5 minutes, incredible. What would be your definition of privacy? What you came here from? Anybody would like to say some words? Oh, we got some volunteer, we go straight to it.
I fundamentally believe that privacy is absolutely what each individual themselves decide privacy is. It cannot be a definition, it cannot be even grouped. For me, I cannot imagine that any two people would have the exact requirement in terms of as long as we give someone the right to decide how the data is saved, where, how long, why, what's done with it. For me, privacy is my requirement and my preference of my information at all times. And not the information that I know about, also the information that I don't know about. To me, privacy is literally my information.
Thank you. Your name, sorry, and? Casper. Casper, oh yes, sorry. Hello.
Should come up onto the panel, because I agree with him 100%.
So on that note too, and research shows that you're right. I mean, if not just for you as an individual, but culturally, every culture defines privacy very differently. And in some cultures have no concept of privacy whatsoever. So it's really interesting when you start thinking about it around the world. And then on the legal side, if anybody really wants to dig into this, there's a guy named Daniel Sullivan in the U.S. And he actually has done a tremendous amount of research in defining this idea of privacy. And he's come to the same point: privacy can't be defined. And what he suggests is that it only can be defined from the harms that its breach can impart. So if my data is misused, that will incur somewhere between 17 to 21 different legal distinct harms, to which I then need to be able to be remunerated from if in fact I've been abused. So that you have that kind of legal side of that discussion. And that's kind of like, you're going to your definition, right? This idea that I should be protected from the misaccess to me, at which point that if that's breached, then there's a harm, and therefore I should be remunerated on that. That's one area, and that tends to fall on the area where people start talking about security, the ability to safeguard or secure my data. Now, there's another definition of privacy that comes from a guy named Alan Weston in 1964. And he defines privacy as the ability for me to manage the flows of my information. The who, what, when, where, why, and for how long can someone have access to me. And that's the one I tend to fall align to. So I actually, to your point, hard to define. There's actually two very distinct points there. There's the flow aspect of it, the security aspect of it, and then you add the third pillar there, which is the compliance aspect of it. Go ahead.
So for a while, I've seen tremendous analogies between people's personal data and their money. That is, there are issues to do with people having their money stolen from them, and there are issues associated with people being able to control where their money gets spent and how. If you look at GDPR, GDPR begins to create a compliance regime that looks a lot more like financial regulation than anything that's gone before then. One of the reasons why I feel so passionate that MEF needs to be at the heart of this whole debate is that about 10 years ago, abuse of the payment mechanism in mobile, which was about money, almost killed the industry. They almost killed our bit of the industry. People played fast and loose, they played transactional, they did dishonest things, they abused the way in which people could have money stolen from them, and it very nearly killed the industry. It was an extremely dangerous moment. It caused active, direct harm to companies. Some people went to prison. I have a feeling that this analogy stretches quite a long way, and that if we as an industry do not behave appropriately with people's data, then at some point we will end up, each and every one of us, potentially vulnerable, either in a public affairs term or increasingly in legal terms to a similar and deeply dangerous exposure.
And just to come on that real quick, I mean, the legal structure is really done around that idea too. It is about the money, and so like in the U.S. at least, that's the one I can talk about, is it's kind of like no harm, no foul, and harm is defined by have you lost money. And because it's very difficult to actually measure the other types of harm, anxiety, loss of time, loss of money because I now need to pay for security services, a loss of reputation, identity theft, and then if my data is in fact breached, it can actually lead to death as well, and there's a number of studies that can talk about that. So there's a lot of harms here.
And I think everybody's saying the same thing slightly differently, because what we are saying is that we can't put privacy in a box, we can't put a boundary around it. It's going to keep changing, as you said, Andrew, because 20 years ago something was about to kill the industry. And since then, a lot has changed, and it will continue to change. So ultimately, I think it would be great if you could put it in a vault on an individual basis, but to your point, today what you decide is not private, tomorrow you may decide is absolutely private, and that's the problem that we're facing for. So then I think the onus is not only on making sure that we manage our data effectively, but there is a level of responsibility with the industry who's leveraging and monitoring this data and using it. Because it's not going to be easy enough for us to say, okay, this is my vault, and you can access the vault and take the data out only with my permission, because that vault won't be big enough to maintain the data as your needs change and as your environment changes, right? So I believe today the industry, to only a very small extent, is held responsible. We talked about Google getting fined in France for $50 million. I think it's a great first step, but for them it's a cost of doing business at the end of the day. So there has to be more responsibility put on these industries and these organizations where there is potential abuse, not use, but actual abuse of users' data. And that's what we have to be careful about. Now, I'm the last one to profess regulation or over-regulation. That's why it has to be a little bit of both. GDPR is regulation, but there has to be ownership and responsibility within the organization by the industry to self-monitor to a certain extent so there is no abuse. And that's what we should be worried about.
But actually, I'm going to again try to be more positive. Okay? So abuse will continue when it's all hidden, and it's the only thing a business can do today is behind our back, because we've given them no other way to engage with us as individuals. Technology hasn't in that sense. But once you do, and it's better for industry to come to the individual because they get a better result, abuse will push to the margins and it will be more noticeable. So this is the key. The individual, if you take GDPR, we don't need any other laws. We've already got what we need. Explicit informed consent. You can only use my data for the purpose I give it to, and I can withdraw that consent and withdraw the data. So if I have, and then data portability, I have all the data, and by the way, the vaults, I don't like that word, but the libraries individuals can create can be as big as they like. There's no limit to that. So if I have all my data and you come to me, I can say yes or no depending upon the value proposition you're prepared to give me. You as a business get infinitely better data than you'll ever get by tracking me at much lower cost, because you don't have to do all that tracking expense. You can just ask me for it. I get to control it and see my whole dashboard. I can change my mind. I can give more to you but less to him. I can do what we've not been able to do. So if you look in the UK, 70% of people say they'll share their health data for social good. But when the government does it, they don't like it because they don't see it. But if it comes from the individual, they can do. All of these things will happen. And we don't need much more than just where is the source of the data? It's the individual. And then everything can flow from that point, and we will get better. And it's directly analogous to your house. Each one of us treats our house with different privacy. We either have net curtains, we don't. We live on a road or off a road. I allow someone to stop at the gate, the front door, in the hallway, the kitchen, the bedroom. We're all different, and we can all make those decisions because we control it. And so the answer to this is, can we create technologies where the individual can control, without having to manage, because nobody likes lots of work, their use and provision of data? And the answer is yes, and it solves a lot of today's problems. So we've got a positive upland.
On that, we have a problem, which is this is a topic we need an entire day to discuss, but it's great. I mean, yeah, fantastic. You got questions. I see one over there and one there. We probably have time for 1.5, so very brief answer and brief question, brief answers.
Hi, I'm Jasper. I am co-founder of SignUp, which is a private vault for your data. And when you got everything there, you can search and do many things with it. I think there's a very good point here that you made there, but we have to remember the purpose behind the data processing is the real question. We're in medieval times, so it's like, imagine in the 12th century when you get the question, what is privacy? It's like asking, what is democracy? In the 12th century, it's the same type of question. So here at MWC, I see three seminars covering privacy, and the rest is something else. So most of the companies still are in the compliance business, but what the purpose of their data processing is, that's what we have to discuss, and that's kind of a value-driven, like DigiMe and you guys over there. Thank you.
Can I get the second question, trying to somebody to answer together to these? And then...
My name is Ian Bushell. It's really just an interest coming back to your point about you owning the data and being able to disseminate it. But in a sense, there's also a need to verify the data. For whatever reason, I may decide to apply for health insurance and neglect to tell you that I have a heart problem. So there's that bit of the equation I'm wondering your solution to.
Who would like to take, well, start with almost the direct questions and then second one.
Okay, so there's two types of verification. One, can you verify the source? So did my financial data come from Barclays or Lloyds or whoever it was? And the answer is yes, most of the technology systems can do that. One thing that can't be done, and I'll just say it straight up, is an individual can always do fraud by omission. They can do it today. So I go to a clinic for my heart attack and I don't put it on my doctor's record. So let's not try and imagine we can solve everything. We can't. So fraud by omission will still have to be covered by signing or other purposes, is the answer to that.
Anurag, quickly, would you like to answer on the topic definitions and future of?
Means that the only thing I'd say about definitions, I think definitions are academic when at the end of the day, you know, we are seeing blatant abuse of what's going on in the industry, right? So my push really is that there should be a level of responsibility within these organizations, and they have to take ownership. They have to take ownership, because if you see some of the data that's being tracked, unbeknownst to end users, they just, there was an article where Facebook is tracking menstrual cycles, right? So it means the extent of abuse that's going on, that has to absolutely stop. Before we even, till we are able to, all of us deploy DigiMe, right? It's going to take quite some time.
But this is also about laws. I mean, in GDPR, it is illegal to process data for a purpose for which it was not exposed and intended. And yes, it's a negative. One of the things that nobody's quite spotted, everyone has, over the last year, has been, the last 2 years, has been talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, Article 81 of GDPR, which talks about the fines. The fines, you know, before anyone exerts 20% fine, you know, we'll be picking up our pensions. Article 82 gives classes of consumers in Europe the right to sue for non-monetary damage. No one's been talking about that. The right of classes to sue for non-monetary damages is probably the single most powerful weapon that the European demos has to ensure that when a company says, I am processing the data for this purpose and not for that purpose, they damn well do that. Because if anyone who has ever traded in America knows that class actions for non-monetary damages is a lethal weapon. Now, of course, in due course, presumably there will be vexatious classes. But if you get people who are systematically abusing people's data, processing the data for purposes for which it was not intended without permission, and they're doing it on a large scale, I have a feeling that we're going to see some really gigantic lawsuits which will put those companies out of business. And that is actually a healthy thing.
And a couple other points just for homework for you all when you think about, when we talk about data, there's 5 levels of like individual elements of data that we can think about, and that's kind of what Julian's been talking about. One of the most powerful things about data, though, is when you create derived insight from that data through algorithmic analysis, and that's where this concept of informed consent or giving consent starts falling down. Because I can give you consent, but I don't understand the algorithms or analytics that you'll use to derive insight about me. You don't even know them because you don't know what the algorithm is going to spit out. So there's a lot of legal issues around this idea of can consent even be informed, or will that be legal down the road? That will be quite interesting. The other thing that we all need to walk away from here is go check out a concept called decentralized identity. And because what's going to start happening is the issuer of an identity key is going to be separated from the verifier of that identity key. So that way, someone could, for instance, the California state can issue me a driver's license. I can go to a bar, say I'm over 21, they verify that against another registry. They can then verify I'm over 21 without actually getting anything else about the
Michael,
information that's on my driver's license.
Because you've just led the audience into a trap when I'm going to interrupt, and I'm going to pull them out again. Because the moment we start talking about identity, there is an enormous confusion. I want to break this down. Identity, and we're going to spend a lot of time in MEF over the coming years talking about identity. Identity consists of a number of bits. One of the bits are the attributes. Your identity are your attributes. Another bit of your identity is your ability and authority to assert those attributes. That's the authentication process. California, your identity is actually the sum total of the different attributes that you've got, which may not include your name. The fact that you're 18 is not your identity. The fact that you're 18 is one of the attributes that makes up your identity, and which you can assert. And your right to assert that, which is also part of your identity, is actually part of the authentication process. You've got to break that down.
So I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I'm just suggesting go check out a whole new standard called the decentralized identity that will allow you to take that identity key and tie it to the attributes that he's talking about. There's a technology that's evolving there that will let this scale. We don't have enough time for that now. That's a whole day in itself.
I mean, there's a whole, within MEF, we're going to have to deal with this. There are a number of different architectures that will that are emerging, which will enable people to populate attribute databases, either centralized or decentralized, in different ways, and will enable them to transfer those attributes to recipients in different ways, and will enable them to authenticate themselves to those relying parties in different ways. And actually, what you're going to find is what you might call identity hopping, in which you start off with one store of identity, you assert those to another, they go, oh, I'll have that. Then now they have your attribute store. Then you assert it to another one, and the attributes get transferred, and they hop it. So you're going to end up with what the Swedes call identity switching.
So the summary is that it's not just the privacy and security of today's architecture. The architecture is changing, and that will fix some of the security and privacy issues. It'll no doubt bring some new issues with it.
Great. I would like, before, we still have 3 minutes. Oh, fantastic. Then we so much to cover, but the fact that we've got 5 more minutes makes me so happy. I'd like to know one question. If I'm out there walking, I'm thinking, privacy, great, but you know what? I want to make money. So tell me, is there such a thing as a personal data account? Can you monetize this? It's something when Julian started saying you have to look at it differently, but who's going to make money then?
When I first came into the identity business in 2012, 2013, I saw a lot of unbelievably visionary people with great ideas and frayed cuffs. Fantastic opportunities, no money. Julian?
Right. So first of all, everybody fixates on money, which is the wrong thing to fixate on, even though we're business people. It's value exchange, right? Service, convenience, or reward. So as an individual, I might want to share my data because you're going to give me better health. I might want to share my data because it's more convenience that you're giving me. It may just be a game. Or, yes, you might give me some reward, right? Whether that's money off or something else. But it's not just about money. Now, actually, when I look across the people who are building stuff, the people who are concentrating on reward are having a much harder time of it, frankly. Because the mechanisms are not changing fast enough, and I think that will come second, a distinct second. Now, there are a few, but the convenience and the service side, which is effectively money, because you trade these things for money and time and effort, but they're the things where we as individuals will share our data more, all right? Because the amount of money you get if you just sell your data for advertising or whatever is not very much, right, when it comes down to the individual. But the quality, the things that you can do that you can't otherwise do when you share your data, like get a loan that you couldn't do because you've got a thin credit file, like, you know, not have your operation go wrong because they didn't know about the health thing that you did 10 years ago, and so on and so forth, is quite immense.
On the recipient side, on the relying party side, there is money in trust. If I trust the attributes of the person on the other end of the line, then I can successfully close a transaction with them with a greater probability and transact with them and make money out of them in that way that I wouldn't do it. So the authentication business has money in it, lots of it right now.
Right, and I think Julian said this, and I think it said it right. Ultimately, it's about equitable value exchange, right? If someone feels good about the services they're getting in return of their data being shared, and they're happy about it, so be it. There's so many people I talk to, do you care about Facebook monitoring every aspect of what you do? A lot of people say, I don't really care. The reason they're saying that is because they believe they're getting enough value back, and it's not a concern any longer. So it's a very relative thought process, which again will change depending on the data and depending on the value provided by the vendor. So managing that is I think, important at the end of the day.
And I wish we had all day to talk about this. So the value exchange question is really important. If you think about the formula of value exchange, it's kind of a ratio of the benefits I get divided by the risks plus the social good that gets out from the exchange of the data, because our society is benefiting from the flows of data. But what most people don't consider is the externalities within that formula. What that risk of identity theft, what the implications of are the anxiety that I will incur when that data, that's why we have the Clause 82 in the GDPR, right? Because I'm now getting all of this anxiety for the fact that I have these risks. And so people don't know enough to be able to put that into the formula for value exchange, and that's another thing we're going to have to fix as we're going to move forward in the market.
Unfortunately, our time is over, as we all know, but the topics and its topics are many. First of all, I'd like to thank our panelists here, but thanks to Rice also because I would like to continue to listen to them. At MEF, we have a platform. The opportunity is also for all of you to come, shape, discuss with them, and take it forward. So next time, not 3, but 6 at least of the events at Mobile World Congress will be talking about data and what implication in the value creation it is. Well, thank you, first of all, for you four, and thanks for you as well.